Okay, good evening, everyone. This is Sachin Karnik. Today is the 17th of November, 2024. I want to welcome you to Angel Wing Sunday evening presentations as well as contemplative meditative dialogues. We are starting, in fact, a brand new series on the religious traditions of the world. This has been requested by several of you who wanted to talk about this and contemplate on this. So I put some stuff together. We have touched on various concepts from multiple traditions over the years, like kind of in bits and pieces. We have not gone through a systematic review, an objective systematic presentation or review yet. So we're starting that right now. So the first point that I want to make here is that there is a great curiosity and mystery in front of us. And that is the mystery of existence. There's basically 5 questions, I would say, that are the fundamental questions. Who am I really? This is the question about the me, the question about the self. For question number 1. Question number 2 is, what is the nature of this world? This world that we see outside, in fact, our internal world also, what is its nature? That's question number 2. Question number 3, is there a creator or the cause from which all of existence has come about? What is the cause of this world? Right? That's question number 3. Question number 4 is the great mystery of what we were before we came into this world, before birth. What will happen to us when this body goes away, when we die? That's the 4th question. And the 5th question is, how ought I live my life here? How should I live my life? Ethics, morality question. These are the 5 basic questions. Now, you can add many more if you want, really, but these are the big universal classic questions in the history of humanity. So every human being at some point begins to ask one or more of these questions. And in the history of humanity, from prehistoric times in recorded history till present, many, many, many different teachers, gurus, prophets, incarnations, call them what you will. They have come with various answers, various ways of looking at these answers. In my study, in my good 20, 25, 30-year study on this over the years, what I would share with you is that there are basically 2 approaches that have been taken in humanity. And I have mentioned this before. I'm just going to do a quick review. There's 2 approaches. One is a more experimental approach of trying to discover the internal world through meditation, the probing inside the inner world. This is one approach. And another approach is to ask that which is beyond, that which is transcendent, to reveal itself through revelation. And then truth is revealed in the minds of various individuals. And that is revelation that has come. So there is experimentation and experiential realization on one side. And this is throughout the world. It's not just any one tradition. And then on the other side, or another approach, is for revelation. That which is beyond, that which is transcendent, that which we cannot understand through our mind as easily, is revealed to the mind by grace, by something special that happens when a person begins to ask for that. It's a great mystery. Now, these are the 2 approaches in terms of how the religions of the world have developed. All the religions of the world have developed in one or the other, or some combination of both of these approaches, or of this kind of method, if you want to say that, but that's not really the best word to use. Now, there is another approach, apart from this type of religious approach, this type of asking the divine or asking God or anything like that. I mean, the words, I'm still not using those words yet. Let's save that for later on. There's another approach that has been taken by intellectual philosophy, and that is to utilize the innate resources of the mind, the intellect, to probe using reason to come to these answers. So that is a third approach. That is the approach through reason, using the intellect. And from that approach has developed the empirical sciences, the scientific methodology, the study of psychology, the study of sociology, all the academic disciplines. They have been developed out of the intellect. So let's just make sure these 3 points are really clear, right? So the point number 1, we have all those questions, those 5 questions. The first point is experimentation. Experiment with breathing and with postures and with going into the nature and stuff like that, and trying to discover through meditation, through reflection, through probing, what am I? Who am I? And then the other approach is more of prayer, that I don't know who I am, and I believe that there is a source, and I want that source to reveal to me what it is actually. Revelation. And that's very interesting. So the 3 major Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, are revelation-based. The Vedas from the Hinduism tradition are also revelation-based. So the meditators began like this with this experimental and experiential approach, but then at some point they started to ask, they started to pray, they started to ask that we don't know what you are, what that is. Revelation came in the form of the Vedas. The Veda mantras were heard. They are called Apaurushaya. Apaurushaya means not created by the human mind. That is what the tradition says, and I will talk much more about it later on. And then the third approach is philosophy, intellectual philosophy, particularly Western philosophy. It is to use the resource of reason to say we will reason it out. We will find the truth through reason. We don't want to just accept some God or some tradition or this or that, or we don't want to just experiment with the breathing practices or postures. No, that's okay if you want to do that, but we don't want to do that. We want to use the sharp knife of reason to come to the truth. The search for the truth, the love of wisdom. We want to become wise. We want to come to the fundamental truth. We want to really probe into all of the big questions of life. What is beauty? What is knowledge? What is truth? What is tradition? What is God? What is the intellect? What is the mind? What is the brain? We want to probe everything through our intellectual power. And this is why even today, when you get a PhD in any subject, it is called Doctor of Philosophy in biology, in psychology, in physics, in whatever, economics. Always the P refers to philosophy. That's where it begins. All of the academia itself begins with philosophy. And that means intellectual power. So now we have to acknowledge we have intellectual power. We have the capacity to experiment and experience, and we have the capacity to completely let go and say, I do not know you, that which is beyond, who has created all. You please reveal yourself to me. That is the third possibility. It's very interesting. Very interesting. And as time has gone on, all 3 of these approaches have phenomenal development. Phenomenal. I mean, it's just astounding the level of development in each of these. I'll give you an example. If you take Judaism, the Jewish tradition, Judaism wasn't there at that time when Moses, the story of the Moses, and then the 5 books of the Torah and all these things that came about. That where did this come from? It raises the question, what did Moses actually experience on Mount Sinai? What was that? The things that he wrote down in the original language at that time. What was actually happening, his historical facts. So one of the biggest problems that exists as far as all the religious traditions go is the divide between what actually happened versus what has come in tradition. This is a serious problem that is analyzed in academia, in religious studies and philosophy departments. And I want to mention this here, and there is one more thing I want to mention before I proceed forward. The Angel Wing LLC does not promote or criticize any religious tradition, any philosophical tradition. This is a self-development program. I'm going to put this as a caveat, as a disclaimer. because this is a very touchy subject, and I had to think a little bit about how to do this today, actually, because people have strong feelings about religious ideas and traditions, and so many diverse ideas are there, which is fine, but to each his own. We are not promoting or criticizing or doing any of that. Simply I'm going to present as objectively as I can. If I'm going to give a commentary or my opinion, I'll share that with you. You do with it what you want. Okay, so we'll leave that disclaimer there. Now, having said that, there is a very serious, contentious problem in the study of religious traditions. And that problem is about the divide between what actually happened with those individuals who started those traditions versus the tradition that has come over hundreds and hundreds or thousands of years. For example, we'll use three people as an example. Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, right? Three very famous individuals in the history of humanity. And then we'll use three other examples from the Indian tradition. In the Eastern tradition, we'll use Buddha, Krishna, and let's say we use Rama. Ram, Krishna, and Buddha. Let's use Krishna, Rama, and Lao Tzu. I'm sorry, Krishna, Lao Tzu, and Buddha. So those three are there, and these three are here. We've got three individuals, or six individuals total, who are they are the founders of each of those traditions. Lao Tzu is the originator of the Taoism tradition, right? Buddha, the awakened one, the Buddha started the Buddhism tradition. And then Krishna started one of the big key key figures 5,000 plus years back in the Hindu tradition, what we call Hinduism today. In the Western side, we have the Jewish tradition. The key person there is Moses. In Christianity, we have key person is Jesus. And in Islam, we have Muhammad, right? We have these three. Now, here's the big problem with all of this. Problem in terms of trying to discover truth. What actually was their life, as opposed to what has come in history? Is the tradition over thousands of years, has it been reformulated? Has it been idealized? Has it been homogenized? Has it been twisted, turned, things added? How do you know what really happened? And each of these traditions are very old. It's not like there were camcorders or iPhones taking pictures. It's not like that. Now, I'll give you a more modern example. Take Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi, you know how many videos there are, the writings are there, audios are there. It's very unlikely he would be turned into a god later on. He could be, but it's unlikely because there's so much documentation. You saw who he was, etc. I'm not saying this. I'm presenting this as what happens in this analytical process. You decide what you want to do with this. I'm only here to present this idea because it's a very controversial thing to discuss. But this is where we have to begin to understand and unravel the mystery of religious traditions before we get to even mysticism and all those other things. Is this divide between what actually was versus what has come in tradition? And that is a contentious problem. It is a contentious problem because, as the example that I gave you, since the advent of all the scientific technology, all of the gods have disappeared. Nobody who has been recorded on a camcorder has been turned into a god. But all those people who came before all the recording was there, the actual video and audio recording, so many have been worshipped as gods and goddesses and so many other things like that. Why is that? If you go to a place like India, my mother is there now, you cannot imagine the religious diversity there. I'm quite sure I could take any one of you to India for about 6 months and turn you into a living god in about 6 months over there. It's very easy to do that. To have a temple, and people have blind faith almost. So that's another question about blind faith versus actually opening your eyes. And this question about the philosophical enterprise to inquire into the traditions of the world stands to many times thoroughly unravel these traditions. Richard Dawkins, the three big horsemen, the atheists, the modern atheists that have come about, Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, and Daniel Dennett. And again, I'm presenting this objectively. I'm not promoting anything one way or the other. I'm just trying to present it. I'm mentioning that again. I don't want there to be a misunderstanding. What I'm asking you to consider is that, is there a divide between what actually was of that individual, like Moses, who he really was, versus what has come in tradition over the last so many thousands of years. And then what has been written about him, what he even said, wrote, etc., how authentic is that? See, again, there was not even a simple iPhone or a recording device. If there was just a simple tape recorder of everything that Jesus said or Krishna stated, or if Buddha stated, most of the controversies we have now about their teachings wouldn't be there. All the modern people who have come in the 18th, 17th, 18th, 19th century, or whenever, when all this recording was there, or quite a bit of documentation, those controversies don't exist. I mean, you can interpret the teachings in various ways, but those controversies have disappeared because of the advent of technology. But now this is very interesting. When we consider the question about the divide between what actually was, for example, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, who they actually were, what really happened at that time, versus what has been recorded and then transmitted generation to generation. Has it been twisted, turned, added, modified, idealized, this, that? And there, if you look at a history vault, go to Great Courses Plus, there's so much research done by scholars showing how much distortion there is in all of this. Not that they're completely discounting it, but they are scholars in religious studies departments or history departments, and they try to show where these things have been changed and distorted and all that kind of stuff. But they still survive. And very few people ever study the scholarly writings of this kind of analysis. Very few. Most people are just going to go based on tradition, based on what's been taught and upbringing and conditioning and whatnot. But to really do a thorough, objective study, one would have to go to the scholarly analysis of all of these researchers to find out what is the actual evidence, what is the research behind it, what is the archaeological evidence also. And then on that basis, how has the tradition developed? Who developed the tradition? See, that's why I've been hesitant to discuss this subject because of all these reasons. It is a very tricky thing to try to present because once you get into this thing, what I don't want to do, is to disturb anybody's faith, because it's a dangerous thing to talk about. Your faith can completely be unraveled if you start asking these questions, and that can also be harmful. Because faith is a psychological phenomena, or a spiritual psychological phenomena. You see, so it's very interesting. And millions of people have all kinds of faith in the religious traditions of the world. And that's a great psychological anchor. And if that is damaged or disturbed, that's a problem also. If crisis of faith, right? We use that expression. My God, I started studying all this stuff and my faith has disappeared. My faith is doubted. I'm doubting everything now. That can happen. So that's a danger in this. So be very careful. My suggestion to anybody listening to this is to be very, very careful in the study of these kinds of questions. Because if you start to study the religious traditions, you're going to come across hundreds of people from every possible angle, from the apologetics to people who are completely against these traditions and everybody else in between, with every kind of viewpoint you can imagine. And it can turn one's mind into a chaotic jungle. That's a danger. There's a danger. I mean, I'm not telling people not to study these things, but it's not easy. In my opinion, my humble opinion, and I'm sharing it with you because I've gone through this very, very severe difficulty myself over the last many years, because I was, yes. Question, go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead.
Since we are talking about the religious talk,
Yes.
Can you explain the difference between religion and spirituality? Since you are saying it's too complicated to explain, or I'll give you some confusion, all those things. If you give the details, difference between religion and the spirituality, we don't have any problem to continue on that.
Yes, the only reason that I'm mentioning this background, because this is being recorded and it is on our Angel Wing platform. The reason I'm mentioning that and taking some extra time is that this is a tenuous, very tricky subject. Yeah. So it's a good question. I'll get to your question in just a moment. The question about religion versus spirituality, it depends how you define this. There's no agreement on this. There are people who say that I believe, for example, they will say, I believe in Jesus tremendously, but I don't believe in Christianity. There are people who say that I believe 100% in my denomination, but I'm not spiritual. There are people who say that I'm 100% spiritual, but I believe in no religious traditions. There are people who say I'm very spiritual and religious at the same time. How is this defined even? Who defines it? See, now this is another question that comes. How are these words defined? When we use the word religion, there is even I'm talking about thousands of years of history in trying to understand the development of that word even. Because that word comes from the Greek word religos, and it meant a certain thing at that time in that culture. So this is why this is a very difficult thing for me to try to do. I'll do the best I can, but we have to go slow. And please do ask, because part of the other difficulty, we already have prefixed definitions in our mind. Like, for example, when I think of Hinduism, I have all kinds of images and ideas already prefixed in my mind. Even now, I have that. Can I put that all aside and try to approach it in a completely objective manner? It's very difficult. It's extremely difficult to do that. And it requires years to do that. You see, so that's why when you go for a master's degree or a doctoral degree in religious studies, that's what they have to do. That's why they have those degrees. Now, obviously, we are not giving degrees to people or going into that level, but in our own way, my only suggestion is that to be very slow, cautious, and careful in opening this Pandora's box, because that's what this is. It is a massive Pandora's box, and one has to be. That's why I have stayed away from this subject for the last 3 years in Angel Wing. But it's a great thing to talk about. We kind of talk about it in a little lighter way, but you can see where the trouble begins. Even to define spirituality, what does that mean? The word spirituality has the word spirit. Who has defined the word spirit? And what is that spirit? There are thousands of opinions. There's no, it's not like you open up a biology textbook and say, well, the mitochondrial DNA looks like this and this is its structure. It's not like that. It's not an empirical science. You can take any one verse, even from the Bible, and there are thousands of interpretations. Interpretations upon interpretations. You can take the Bhagavad Gita. I can show it to you. I cannot tell you the number of commentaries that are written on that. My only point here is that there's no one answer. There are multiple perspectives on everything. I mean, for example, take Mahatma Gandhi. I'm going to give you some examples of why this is so difficult. Mahatma Gandhi, which everybody knows, he has his own interpretation and vision of the Gita, which he utilized to do the political work that he wanted to do. And quite often in the history of humanity, significant number of politicians have pulled ideas from religious concepts and ideas to do what it is that they want to do. Yes. Martin Luther King Jr. did it. Gandhi did it. So many have done it. So many. And so many thousands, in fact. You see, and then there are those political systems that have completely banned religion, like the Communist Party and whatnot. That try to get rid of it completely. So this is a very dangerous subject. Dangerous in the sense it can unravel if it's not handled properly. It can cause even more confusion than the already confusion that's already there in the world. You see, so I'm giving this as a caveat, and I'm going to try to present this very objectively. So that's my background. Now let's go forward. Let's go forward from where we were. Is there such a thing as revelation? Whose revelation? How do you know there was revelation? And this is where there's an area called philosophy of religion. Philosophy of religion examines all of these claims. That God spoke to Moses. Okay, but did God actually speak to Moses? What was that? Is it some hallucination? Now you've got the whole area of psychiatry. Is this entire realm of religion a type of hallucination? a type of psychosis, a type of delusion. But again, you have to go into clinical psychiatry to understand this point. I hope you're okay with all this. If you have any questions, I'm going to open up the Pandora's box. But it is a very fascinating thing. If you're up to it, up to the challenge, then I'm with you all the way. See the question of delusion. The word delusion is used in the DSM-5. It's used in psych. Delusion is false belief. I'm believing in something that is actually not there. For example, if I say the moon is made out of yellow cheese, I believe it strongly. That's a delusion. The reality is not that is not made out of yellow cheese. So Richard Dawkins has written the book, The God Delusion, that the entire religious tradition is a massive psychological delusion. And if you read through his book, as well as Richard Hitchens, he's another atheist, Sam Harris, Richard Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and Daniel Dennett. 4 horsemen, they're called, the modern atheists. And they have a massive following in this country, in the Western countries. And if you go through their teachings and videos and writings and all that, you might become an atheist within 6 months. Very quickly, if you're not already. And if, think about this. So the point is, there is even a clinical angle to all of this. I mean, I used to have patients, when I was doing I was a crisis clinician and whatnot, there used to be teenagers who would see Jesus. They would talk to Jesus. They would see their passed away grandfather. Most of them were hospitalized at Rockford Center, and then they were sometimes suicidal. So we would get authorization from the state saying this person needs to go to the hospital. Is it a delusion? Is it a hallucination? Is it some psychosis? Is it a psychiatric problem? What the heck is it? Nobody knows. What is it actually? Now, if you look at varieties of religious experience, William James, I mentioned this before, he has documented God knows how many people in there about having mystical visions from every religion of the world. What is that? Is it a projection of the mind? Is it some hallucination? What's even meant by a hallucination? And is faith, how is faith and belief developed? Is that something conditioned inside the mind out of tradition, which is imposed like the blank slate on the mind of a child? And it is completely a condition, like a programming of a computer? That's what John Locke would say, philosopher. Is that what it is? You see the trouble here in this. This is why I've stayed away from this. It's a massive trouble to try to analyze, but if you're really up to the challenge, be patient. Don't come to any quick conclusion. Please, that is my humble request. This is a very, very tricky thing, because the problem is you start going in any one direction, whatever your mind is, whatever your faith might be, it could potentially be obliterated if you start to analyze these things. Or you might start developing a very strong faith in something that you didn't have before. That might happen also. Take, for example, what is called apologetics. Okay, apologetics is there in every religion of the world, by the way. It starts with pre-fixed set of beliefs. And then the individuals who are apologetics, who are apologists, that's what they're called, they justify them intensely. And then they are just into it completely. It begins with a set of pre-fixed beliefs. I'll give you an example from the Hindu tradition. Let's say you have an organization. I won't give any names here, but let's say you have an organization that believes in Krishna. They say Lord Krishna or Bhagavan Krishna, right? You believe in Sri Krishna. All right. So there are many organizations in India, and they have worldwide, that they have a whole doctrine of beliefs about Krishna, his teachings, his incarnation, his abode, his this, that. So many things are there, and then so they start with that. Where did they get that from? From thousands of years of theological development around that one person. And this is the point one of the next point I want to make. Those 6 individuals I mentioned, that is Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, Krishna, Buddha, and Lao Tzu. All 6 of them, and there's many more, but these are 6 I've selected here, major ones. They have traditions that have been developed after them. Massive traditions, interpretations upon interpretations, scriptures upon scriptures. And in India, for example, there's Mahavir. Mahavir is the originator of the Jaina tradition. He's called a Tirthankar, an enlightened being. And currently there are over 100 separate denominations in Jainism. In Christianity, there are some 70,000 denominations only in the United States. In Hinduism, what we call Hinduism, there are 30,000 denominations of Hinduism. And Judaism has many, and so does Islam. They all have so many. Buddhism has hundreds of denominations. Why? Why is that? How does tradition develop? It's very interesting. Why does it develop? Okay, let's trace it back. Let's take Jesus, for example. Whoever the actual Jesus was historically, actual, not the tradition. Tradition may be reflecting the actual to some extent or another, or maybe to a large extent, like the movie that came out, The Case for Jesus Christ. There's a movie that came out that traces this historical development. And right after that movie came out, a book came out against that, The Case Against the Case for Jesus. Right after that, within like few months, right after it, actually. I actually saw that movie in the movie theater. And then 2 months later, this massive, counter argument against it came out. And this goes on. The point is, how does tradition develop? It develops based on the original teacher's teachings. He's been taught to someone or a group of people, and then it has been transmitted. The problem in all of these traditions, or quote, the challenge, is to discover the reality of what the actual original person taught, what they taught and what their life really was, as opposed to what has come in tradition. You see, so somebody was asking me the other day, like in the Hindu tradition, there's people who believe that the Gita that was spoken, to Arjuna and Krishna are in the middle of the battlefield, and these 700 verses are spoken there, and somehow the belief came that Krishna, being an incarnation of God, stopped time, and he taught this Gita. He stopped time. Now, where did this come from? How do you know that's what happened? And because Krishna didn't write the Gita. It was a sage who wrote the Gita, put it inside the scripture. So there's an actual historical development based on the actual history, the real, the objective history versus the faith-based ideology or theology or tradition that has come out in that history or come through history. And either they could be synchronized, but they're not usually the same. There's usually quite a bit of divide between the two. And that's a problem. And then this is where the difficulty comes. If someone has strong faith in a particular tradition, you start studying this stuff in history and philosophy of religion and historical development, that faith can be slowly unwound and destroyed completely. And that's a problem in itself. I don't want to do that to anybody. I'm not trying to do that to anybody. But that can happen. So be very careful, because this is the kind of subject that if you're going to go into it, it's to study any one tradition, you have to go into it thoroughly, so that it integrates within yourself. If it doesn't integrate properly within, it can cause a lot of difficulty. And I've seen that happen. In fact, in the clinical psychology, there is a diagnosis. They used to call them V codes. Now they have some other terminology. It's called religious confusion, religious problem. So you find patients who have all this turmoil because of religious confusion, and that becomes a clinical diagnosis. Think about all this. See, I'm trying to go slowly here. You see, so it's very interesting. Now, go ahead, Sylvia, please. Please ask questions up to this point.
Well, why does it have to be like so terrible if you change your thinking about things? Because it's a wonderful thing that you gather more and more information.
Yes.
And you grow, and your mind expands, and then you begin to look at something different and say, oh, I think I believe this better.
So that's a fantastic question. Thank you for that question. I love that question. It requires a certain amount of psychological strength and maturity to question one's beliefs. And if you don't have it, if you don't have that strength to do so, and then it begins to shake, it can cause a lot of emotional disturbance. It can cause psychological disturbance. That's why I've stayed away from this. But it's okay with, I know all of you online, and it's all right. And I think I put enough caveats out there. Maybe we won't even put these recordings on YouTube or anything like that. It's just, I'm just hesitant about it a bit, but because you're playing with, with something that is potentially very solid inside a person, and you try to, and if it gets shaken, they have to know how to handle that. Yeah, otherwise,
We're all special people.
you guys are probably okay. You guys are okay, and my suggestion is only this much: keep objectivity as a student. If you're going to do it that way, just like you're taking a class in the university, if you do it that way, you should be all right. But if you begin to internalize some of these things, and then it causes some disturbance, then one has to be careful in that. One has to be, because it's not easy to handle that kind of thing. That's why.
Hey, Sachin,
Yeah, go ahead, please.
why don't I interpret this way? I do not have knowledge of of course, I follow Hinduism. I don't think I have the 100% knowledge of Hinduism also.
Yes.
You are giving me the world religion knowledge to me.
Yes.
I'm taking in that way. It won't be any problem at all.
That's good.
I'm learning from you all the different religions,
Good.
and whatever the respect I have, I'm going to improve it much better. Whatever the negative thinking or something, whatever it has because of lack of knowledge, I'm going to forget those negative things and consider them as a positive.
Very nice. Very nice. That's exactly what needs to be done. Thank you for sharing that. Because see, I'm glad you're interacting on this, because I need to hear from all of you. Really, please. That's fantastic, Padmaji. Thank you so much for that. Exactly correct. That from here, decide how to integrate these ideas, what to leave aside, what to take. I mean, I'll give you an example. I'm just going to give you I'm going to share with you some of my own thinking on this. It's wonderful to study all kinds of religious and spiritual ideas. But what does it mean for me in my life, actually? It's not just about my following some doctrine somewhere because somebody's telling me to. Maybe if I'm convinced that I want to do that, then that's my freedom. I can freely do that if I want. Go into a particular denomination of Christianity or denomination of Hinduism and be involved in them. And, people go into it in depth, and sometimes they take initiation, they become nuns, or they become monks, or they go deeper and deeper. I mean, they can become monastic monks, and there's all kinds of amazing stuff out there. To study it is fantastic. But at the same time, in the process of studying, just keep an open mind. Learn how to integrate what is needed in our life. Leave those things that don't resonate with us. Then I think we should be absolutely fine. Then we should be really good. And thank you please do make those comments. Right? Okay. So having said that, let's continue. If we are on the same page here, let's continue forward. The fun. See, we're already at 7:40. No, we haven't even begun yet, really. So let's go back to the mystery of nature. What we will find, and I have a whole bunch of slides here for you, but I'm going to show you a couple of them. Let me do a quick slide share here. Just a moment, folks. All right, hold on. Okay. So this presentation is an overview of the concept of religion, right? So how it's developed, and we're going to want to explore it nicely. Okay, so that's the outline. Okay. Origins of religious thought. Okay, so let's look at some interesting stuff here. Prehistoric spirit practices. Cave art. Cave art is one of the earliest forms of prehistoric spiritual practices depicting the belief in supernatural powers that control the natural world. It serves as an important source of information about early human culture and history. This is interesting, that even in the prehistoric times, the people have drawn different artistic diagrams that are indicative of this belief of supernatural, something beyond, that is controlling the natural world. So that's cave art is part of the prehistoric practices. Ritual burials. Ritual burials were a common practice in prehistoric times and were centered around the belief in an afterlife. These burials were often accompanied by grave goods and other objects to assist the deceased after life. So the belief in an afterlife was there since prehistoric times. And shamanism was a practice in prehistoric times used to communicate with the spirit world. Shamans were believed to have supernatural powers and acted as intermediaries between humans and the spirit world. So let's talk about this before we get to a bunch of other things here. So this is now my commentary, Sachin's commentary. Please interrupt me anytime. I believe in my last 25, 30 years of study on all this stuff, that we have an innate curiosity about who we are, where we came from, what is going to happen once we pass away. We have the ability to ask those questions, and we're curious about them. And because of that, we then, as humanity over thousands of years, have developed, have tried to either contact that which is beyond the normal reality, or have tried to answer those questions, intellectually, as I said, or have tried to just hold on to certain strong beliefs that that may have been passed down. So this thing about the shamans and all that, these people entered into some different state of consciousness. So there has been attempt to move out of our regular state of consciousness. What is that regular state of consciousness? The waking, dream, deep sleep state. Vedanta talks about that. Obviously, that's where it talks a lot about it. We go through these every single day. But is there something beyond all of that? So that would be the mystical question. So these shamans and all these other kinds of individuals, they enter into some trance state. Sometimes they take drugs also. There's a lot of history of people taking psychoactive substances of various kinds to try to open that doorway into some transcendental dimension. Right? So there's a human craving to discover what is consciousness, or who am I, or what is that? What is it that's beyond our normal experience? And that kind of attempt it's where each religious tradition, the founder of each religious tradition, the 6 that I just mentioned, each of them have shown practices, sets of beliefs, sets of ideals and ideas that are going to assist an individual in the realization that they have. Take the Buddha, for example. He has developed the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths, and all kinds of the Dhammapada and all the teachings. What is all that? He initiated so many people eventually. Why? So that they would experience what he experienced. They would get to this realization he has. So all of them, Jesus and his teachings, the Old Testament and the prophets and the teachings in the teachings there. And then, of course, all the different commentaries and theologians. What is the purpose of it? To recreate that state that the original teacher has. This is one way to look at it. But the theological interpretations are many, many. So people have looked at the Bhagavad Gita as just a teaching, about the mind and the senses and mastery of the mind and senses, and about the soul. And they don't really worship Krishna or anything like that. They just use it as a didactic book. And there's those who take it literally. There's people who take the Bible literally, every word of it. And there's people who use it only as a metaphorical text, right? So many ways to go about it. But the point is, what does it mean for us? What is the value in it for us? And the invitation to spiritual, or what we will say, psycho-spiritual practice. Practice meaning to take steps, to do things in one's life, realigning one's mind, establishing a moral compass, like the 10 Commandments, that's the morality. Teachings of Jesus has morality in it. There's all kinds of scriptures in India that talk about morality. Confucius wrote the Analects about what ought to do, how we can live our life in the best of our ability. And there's quite a few number of Chinese philosophers, quite a few. I don't have all the names with me right now, but there's quite a few of them. They've all tried to guide others. Now, why is that guidance even there? Because we live in a hierarchical world. Children are brought up in a society, in a culture. They are given a certain language. They're brought up with a certain belief system, and etc. And if we don't have that, we don't have humanity also. You see, so that raises another question altogether, that is it possible to raise children with a completely open mind without it being influenced by a belief system, by a tradition, by a culture? Is that even possible? So we don't know that. It's never happened so far. I mean, look, I don't want to go into the specifics, but there's quite a few traditions in the world, and specifically more tight-knit religious groups. They want their children to be part of that. They want their children to adopt those practices. In every throughout the world, it's there. Is that practice even ethical? Some philosophers say it's not ethical. Some say no, that is what ought to be done. But then, how does a person remain free? You see the series of questions here. When children are brought up, can they be brought up without the influence of a belief system or a particular cultural viewpoint or a religious tradition that is conditioning their mind and locking up their mind? Is it possible to bring children up without that? Now here's another question. What if laws were passed that you're not allowed to transmit any religious tradition to children at all until they are of age 20, 21, 22, where they're exposed to the different traditions and they can make up their own mind at that point? They're given some generic education, no exposure to religious ideology at all. What if there was a law? Would you accept that? You see this, how tricky this is. We have every religious tradition of the world has churches or mosques or synagogues or temples, and their goal, one of their big goals throughout the world, Buddhist monasteries also, is to transmit to the next generation their particular beliefs. The children that are born in that community, to transmit them. Yes, right from childhood, and some of those kids are deeply involved in that. Is that ethical? Is that what ought to be done? Is that it's legal, certainly, but what if a law was passed in the future you can't do? Or what if a law was passed that only the one particular tradition is to be taught, nothing else? And that kind of stuff has happened also. I won't go into the details of that. That's happened throughout the world. That you cannot learn anything else except what we're teaching you. You see this range of questions. The question about religion has a lot to do with the development of the human mind. Our human mind, as human consciousness, has massive influence of religious tradition. I was watching a documentary today. I spent about 3 or 4 hours looking at various research materials to prepare for today's presentation. And one of the things that I came across was that at one point, it was a crime, and this is, I don't know the exact dates of this, but this is when Christianity was developing, that Bible could only be read by a certain group of people in the Latin language. And an individual was executed, was killed, actually burned to death because that person translated from Latin to English that Bible. That person was burned to death. I just saw the commentary too. It's on History Channel. I don't remember the individual's name. And then eventually, because they wanted that Bible to be read by only certain elite individuals and not the masses. And then eventually other reformers came and they brought it out, and then it became available to the masses. This happened with the Bible. This happened with the Veda mantras in India. The Veda mantras were held by the Brahmin caste, certain groups. They would not teach it to the next. They would not teach it except to very selected people. This happened in the Tantra tradition. It happened with the Veda mantras also. That no, you're at the lower caste. You're at the lower being. This is not for you. We'll come and do some mantra for you. This and that. You're born impure. These ideas. It's a way of again, this is the history of religious traditions. To lots of them. There's a lot of suppression. But see, now in today's world, everything is open. I don't think knowledge can be hidden anymore. All kinds of knowledge is available now. But that wasn't the case before. And that was very interesting. So that was a whatever justification they had at that point. But that's the history of many of these traditions. But nonetheless, why have they survived? Why has the Bible survived? 66 books or 73 books, whatever number, whichever version you believe. What is it about it that survives despite all of this? What is it about the Gita, 700 verses, that has survived over 5,000 years? And there's constantly commentaries and people fascinated by that. Why? And so in my own reflection, that this can only survive if it has, at least at the minimum, some extraordinary truth that we have the capacity to touch. If it didn't have that, it wouldn't survive. It touches us somewhere. Some ideas touch us somewhere, and then they have been developed. That is the development of theology. There's theology and theodicy. There's apologetics. There's all kinds of developments to try to establish doctrines, doctrinal development, to develop a doctrine. Go ahead, Sylvia, please.
We were talking about this, I don't know, some weeks ago. Remember we were talking about, like, where did this start? Because, like, we all seem to have something in our minds, in our psyche, in our souls, or whatever, that we, that there's something beyond us, something bigger than us, something that created us. What was it that you said? Did we come to a conclusion, or did you?
So there are many possibilities, but but the one thing that I think that we cannot deny is that as part of our human nature, this is innate, inbuilt in us to ask these questions, and not just questions, but to try to actually discover: is there something that is God, that is the divine, that is where this reality has come from? Now, to go into this just a little bit further, based on what Sylvia is asking, what happened in Eastern traditions, they reverted to meditation. That's what happened. They went, why the Himalayas, they went into the nature. They went in rivers and in caves and in forests and all that. There's a huge, we're talking about 10,000 year tradition of going into nature. And this is what we call Hinduism today. It started like this. It didn't start with any temples or anything like that. These people were in nature only. And in nature, they became completely absorbed in the presence of nature. Now I'm going to start giving you Sachin's perspective on this a bit and my own study on this. You'll find this very interesting, what happened. And this happened in the Western traditions also. In a little different way it happened. So they got in touch with nature. This is the first slide I just showed you. Because the only thing we have to work with is nature. We have trees and mountains and lakes and the moon and the stars and this is in our body and people around. What else is there? That's all we have. We don't know where we came from. We were born somehow, into this world. We don't know where humanity started, any of that. Lots of theories are there now. All we have is nature. So what can you do with nature? If you don't have anything else except nature, the only thing that you can do by living in nature is to find a way to completely harmonize in it. Either if we don't harmonize with it, we are at odds with it. So those who said we want to be completely in tune with nature. But how do I do that? In the yogic tradition in India and in other places also throughout the world, it's not just in India. And anyone who has tried to connect with nature, they had to remove the divisive attitude and the divisive feeling with nature, which includes animals, trees, plants, everything. The division between me and that bear, me and that tiger, me and that mountain, me and that cloud, that begins to dissolve. How? How does that begin to dissolve? How can that be? Even in the Western traditions, of course, the religions of the world, these are the books, the religious books and traditions, but if you trace where they came from, again, they had to go into mountains. They had to go somewhere for this to begin. Even Jesus, spending 40 days and 40 nights. Moses going into the desert. He was exiled from Egypt, and he was completely beaten down at that time. And then like in that movie, the Ten Commandments movie, they have a nice line in that movie that says where saints and sages are purified in the heat of the desert. His ego had to completely be dissolved so that the God can do his work. Things like that are mentioned. You see, so everyone has to be in nature somewhere. They cannot. That's where these traditions, they all began there, because that's all there was. There were no holy books or anything like that. There was only nature, or other traditions may have been there like prehistoric times. But when you go into nature, let's start with this point. When anybody goes into nature, and we can do it ourselves also. If you want to experiment this is how you do it. Don't take anything with you. Turn your phone off. Go into a nice park. And I've tried this in parks and Longwood Gardens and all that other places. We have these amenities now. But to actually go into nature completely alone, how much courage you need for that. Think about fearlessness, the quality of fearlessness, how difficult that is. To not be bothered with human society, to not be bothered with anything, and says, it's just me and the whole of nature, and that's it. My God, what is that courage to do that? That was the courage that was there in ancient times. And from that, this evolution happened from within. Evolution meaning what? This connection with nature, oneness with it. This is where the word yoga comes from. The word yoga it's actually the word is yog. That's the actual Sanskrit word, but it doesn't matter. And that word yog comes from the word yuj. It simply means to connect. Oh, what is it that we're connecting? There is the oneness with nature. Right now we feel I am inside the world. What was discovered by the ancient meditators is that the world is inside of me. That's the most extraordinary idea. That whatever I'm seeing outside is actually my own glory. My good, I am that I am, as the Bible says. What is that? I'm not talking about Judaism right now. I'm talking about that statement, which could be interpreted this way also. That what is that existence? I am the Alpha and the Omega existence, that which is eternal. So the discovery of the eternality of the substratum upon which all of the temporary existence occurs, this is one of the biggest discoveries and realizations from ancient times. Now, in the religious traditions, you can call that substratum God, you can call it what you want. There are more ways to think about it. But that's a discovery. So when we're in nature completely with the mind open, the breakage out of the waking and dream states, that happens, and then we are able to progress forward. That's how this began, in the Eastern traditions particularly. But then when that opening happens, transcendental phenomena begin to reveal itself. Where this names and forms, where the world out that we see in this body, where it actually comes from, the transcendental reality, that knowledge and that wisdom came. And then they transmitted it, and that transmission is then the tradition. And that transmission is what we call Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism. These are the four big traditions. That is the transmission from what I just explained right now. And now in the Western side, you've got, what was there before Moses. I mean, there was a lot of polytheism at that time. There was the Roman Empire was there. So they had other traditions, and what they actually were is also very difficult to know. We have some bits and pieces of that information. You see, but it's very possible that at one point all of these disparate different traditions were all part of one bigger process of trying to evolve into a higher state. Like the pyramids, what is the purpose of those pyramids? There's alignment with the stars and all kinds of stuff. Theories are there, theories upon theories upon theories, right? So they may have had different kind of technology, which we don't know about. It's even said that in India, that the mantra science, the mantras are so powerful that they would actually can be used as weapons. They can be used to create all kinds of things, that the reality is a vibration. That was discovered also. So that has remained even today. So those mantras that were revealed are as they are. They have not been changed because they were transmitted exactly as they were heard according to the tradition. And that's the way the Sanskrit language developed, you see. So, but in the Western traditions, the books of the Bible were originally in different languages, Aramaic, and Greek. See, so when you translate, it's not just translation. Every religious studies scholar will say it's translation and interpretation. So like for example, in the Bible, it says son of man, but the original doesn't say son, it just says human being, man. You see, it's a whole theological difference as soon as you make that change. So if you have to be a Bible scholar to understand the original Greek or the original Aramaic or the original Hebrew to really probe into the way those words were used at that time, in that context, in that culture. You see, obviously, and if we don't do that, what we have now may be some distorted form of something else, actually. Maybe. But people don't like to think about it that way. They just start going with, okay, now this is the word of God, and that's fine. Oh, well, that's fine. If you want to progress that way, progress. I mean, Sachin has no issue with any of that. But if you are a scholar and you want to discover what historically really happened, one has to go into all this. The discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, for example, big discovery, but 1947. Discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, it put into question many of the ideas written in the Old Testament. So there's a lot of controversy about all that stuff, and they say that some of the pieces were stolen and they were sold, and it's just incredible the things that are there. And all of this has to do with the fact that masses of people have accepted various traditions as the ultimate reality, or this is the way, this is the thing, and as a result of that, there is the development of theology, whether it is Jewish theology, Hindu theology, Christian theology, or Buddhism. We cannot say theology, but there are all kinds of beliefs over there too. You see, so what's interesting here is that when we are wanting to discover the truth, discovery of truth can be done through a belief system. But again, only my commentary here. If we keep the mind open, we're going to grow. We will grow tremendously. We will grow. But be careful. Don't damage that which has already resonated, that which is clear. Keep it like that. And many times these books are written historically to teach lessons. It's not so much the historical accuracy, it's the message that is given. Like Jesus is teaching, take the speck out of your own eye before taking the log out of your neighbor. What is that teaching you? See yourself. Don't bother with other people's faults. See your own fault. Those parables and analogies he has given. What does it mean to me now? That is important. Whether he actually said that or not, it's almost a secondary issue. You see, and this is why those texts have survived. And even I think many religious religious scholars in their commentaries, they would agree. This is why these religious traditions have survived. It's not because of their historical accuracy. It's because there are glimpses of extraordinary truths written in them that resonate with us. For example, the notion of a monotheistic God, that there is a supreme being beyond all of nature. Okay, monotheistic, not monistic, not polytheistic, monotheistic. Well, okay, so that concept developed, but is it just a concept, or is there actually such a being? How would you know that? You see, so the three traditions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, would say, if you follow our traditions, you are going to be in connection with that supreme being, the one monotheistic God. If you follow our traditions, what we're telling you to do. So there is something to be said, maybe a lot to be said, for the development of the traditions, because the development of the traditions is actually showing a pathway to connect with the divine, to connect with that ultimate source, and that pathway is more and more developed based on some core ideas. Is there any problem in that? Again, my thinking only, I don't think there's any issue with it, as long as it doesn't create fanaticism, hatred, negativity, harm to others, or harm to oneself. As long as it doesn't create harm to anybody else or to yourself, there's probably something in there for you. You see, so there can be great benefit in tradition, but at the same time, to recognize that it is a doorway. The tradition is a doorway into the reality itself, or the manifested being. Like, when Jesus says in the Bible, he says, "You have seen me, you have seen the Lord. Nobody cometh to the Lord except through me." Who is he saying that to? He's saying that, assuming he said it, he's saying it to the people who are in front of him. And with another assumption that he's a fully enlightened being. With another assumption that which is transcendental is manifesting as an incarnation. These are all theological ideas in Christianity. With all those assumptions, but then you can take that same idea and say that only through Jesus you'll get to heaven, not through any other way. The people have taken that idea. John 4:16, right? Nobody cometh to the Lord except through me. So Christianity developed on that idea considerably, that if you want to get to heaven, there's only one doorway, that is through Jesus. All the other traditions reject that idea, believe it or not. But the people who believe in Christianity, they said this is the thing. Whatever tradition you may have, you have to come to Jesus sooner or later. So that's the way the tradition developed, right, wrong, or neutral. Now I think similar ideas are there in many other places. There are devotees of Krishna in the Hindu tradition. Some of them will say that if you want to reach the heavens where Krishna is and all that, you have to go through what we're teaching you. You'll not be able to go there unless you come our way. Okay. I mean, that's to each his own, right? And then there's people who've tried to synchronize all these different paths together, like Ramakrishna Paramahansa and others. That's also happened. So there's many, many ways that this is all looked at. It's a beautiful tapestry. My own thinking about all of this, and it's already 8:08, so I'll just make some final comments for today, is that keep the mind open, number one. Learn as much as possible, carefully, with patience. Don't rush. Number three, don't come to immediate conclusions. And number 4 point is that not hold on to divisive negativity. Even though there's disagreement, there's always going to be disagreements. No two people agree on anything in this world. There's always disagreements, are always there. Thousands of interpretations, thousands of disagreements. Follow whichever way you want. See what's resonating. But disagreement should not lead to dislike. Dislike should not lead to anger and hatred. Anger and hatred should not lead to violence, religious violence, which has happened throughout human history. These are my thoughts on this so far. There's a lot to be said about it. This is an introductory presentation here, and I hope you got something out of it. Would love to hear what you have to say. So I'll stop my presentation here right now and love to hear what all of you have to say about any of this.